Johnny, babe, you got the wrong word. They said you were removed by a locomotive. Oh, Johnny, it's so great to see you. Here, let me light your cigarette.
I'll take the light, but you got the wrong guy.
There's an age-old expression popularized by Spider-Man's Uncle Ben. With great power comes great responsibility. Now, being a comic book fan, I love stories about ordinary people with superhuman abilities. It's a fun concept that inevitably takes us down the path of a hero or a villain. How does the lead character in the episode The Four of Us Are Dying use his special powers? Well, let's find out. The Four of Us Are Dying was episode 13 from season 1. It was directed by John Brom and adapted by Rod Serling from an unpublished story by George Clayton Johnson. As always, spoilers are ahead.
His name is Arch Hammer. He's 36 years old. He's been a salesman, a dispatcher, a truck driver, a con man, a bookie, and a part-time bartender. This is a cheap man, a nickel and dime man, with a cheapness that goes past the suit and the shirt, a cheapness of mind, a cheapness of taste. But Mr. Hammer has a talent discovered at a very early age. This much he does have. He can make his face change.
Up front, we meet our lead, Arch Hammer, initially played by Harry Towns. And as we learn in the opening narration, we basically have a villain on our hands. In this case, a shady con artist who can change his face to look like seemingly anyone. Arch is a man with a plan. First up, he impersonates a deceased trumpeter named Johnny Foster. Why on earth would he do this? Well, his goal is to win over Johnny's grieving girlfriend, Maggie, who's a singer in a local nightclub.
So thanks for the cheer.
Maggie falls for the scheme and the two plan to run off together. Arch does show some reservations over manipulating her, but ultimately he decides to just go with it. He rationalizes that it's fine for him to be with this beautiful woman because he's never had a beautiful woman before.
Why not a beautiful dame? Why not? I never had a dish like that. I never been loved like that. Why shouldn't I?
So, clearly we're in some dark territory. Arch then moves on to the next phase of his plan, which is pretty dangerous. He impersonates a gangster named Virgil Sterrig, who'd recently been killed during a heist. Arch confronts the man behind Virgil's murder, Mr. Pinnell. The name of the game now is extortion. Arch is in need of serious getaway money, so he spooks the heck out of Mr. Pinnell and tricks him into believing he somehow survived. He demands his cut of the money. However, things quickly go sideways and Pinnell sends his men after Hammer. Now, I want to quickly mention this scene was my favorite, with great acting and dialogue by Arch. By this point, he was portrayed by Philip Pine. Arch was really pushing his luck by lingering for far too long and basically toying with Mr. Pinnell. By the time Mr. Pinnell's men show up, you're almost wondering what took them so long. In any case, Arch did manage to escape, but he hit a dead end in an alleyway. Luckily, he saw a poster of a boxer, Andy Marshak. He quickly changed his face into the boxer's face, and Mr. Pinnell's men left him alone. Talk about a close call. Then, in a rather insane coincidence, he exits the alleyway and immediately runs into Andy Marshak's father of all people. But this isn't a joyous family reunion. As it turns out, Andy's father is furious with his son for breaking his mother's heart, and apparently he did something awful to a, quote, sweet, decent girl who would have cut off an arm for him.
Now you ain't nothing to me. You're nothing. I hate your guts.
This is a situation Arch wasn't prepared to deal with. He ends up shoving a man down and heads back to his hotel. However, Arch just can't seem to keep himself out of trouble. At his hotel, he's confronted by a detective who's been on his tail. The detective attempts to take him back into the police station for questioning, but once again, Arch uses his skills to make an escape. He makes a quick change back to the identity of the boxer and gives the detective the slip. But the story comes to a violent conclusion when Arch once again runs into Andy Marshak's father. And this time, he's armed. Arch pleads with the old man and tries desperately to convince him he isn't his son.
Just put the gun down. You'll see. I gotta concentrate!
He can't concentrate and change his appearance fast enough, so he ends up getting gunned down. As Arch is dying, we see his face change into all the recent identities he stole before finally settling on his own face.
He was Arch Hammer, a cheap little man who just chucked in. He was Johnny Foster, who played a trumpet and was loved beyond words. He was Virgil Sterrig with money in his pocket. He was Andy Marshak, who got some of his agony back on a sidewalk in front of a cheap hotel. Hammer, Foster, Sterrig, Marshak, and all four of them We're dying.
First off, let's talk about the positives. In this episode, there's a lot to like. The Four of Us Are Dying is just brimming with a noir vibe, which I really enjoyed, and it's all tied together with a great jazz score by famed composer Jerry Goldsmith. The cinematography and set design is also top-notch, as our lead breezes through this fast-paced story. There's a dreamlike quality throughout. We see scattered neon signs everywhere, suggesting the city filled with smoky nightclubs, gangsters, and seedy characters. Arch was brought to life by 4 actors: Harry Towns, Ross Martin, Philip Pine, and Don Gordon. And everyone does really well. They slip into this part of a manipulative and cool con artist. The transitions between each persona are seamless. I can buy that these guys are the same person, swapping faces and tricking people. The shape-shifting gimmick was handled really nicely with simple camera tricks. Arch Hammer isn't someone you can root for, but he's an intriguing character. There's no Uncle Ben moral compass or sense of personal responsibility when it comes to this guy. Arch Hammer is about as selfish as they come. He uses his powers for his own benefit. He doesn't care who gets hurt along the way. Maybe there's something about the ability to shapeshift that just lends itself to villainy. Arch's manipulation of Maggie stands out as one of his more awful acts. Tricking her into thinking he's her deceased lover so he can run off with her is pretty grimy. It also reminds me of modern day catfish. For those who don't know, catfishing is basically when someone on the internet creates a phony identity or persona and then targets a person for the purposes of living out some weird fantasy, or maybe they do so for financial gain. In any case, it's manipulation 101. In Arch's case, it's pretty clear why he goes after Maggie. We see him stroll by and glance at 2 lovers on a bench. He's a lonely guy seeking companionship. That in and of itself is understandable, but he goes about starting a relationship with her in the worst way imaginable. Arch's powers were impressive, but it would seem he did have weaknesses. For example, he can't simply change whenever he wants. Initially, he needs to see the person he's changing into, and he needs to concentrate. Also, Arch is comfortable playing the part of a gangster, or if he's in a role that he's prepped for, but he struggles when he's caught off guard. And it was these character flaws and weaknesses that made him all the more interesting. In the end, the demise of Arch Hammer was fitting. His comeuppance was that he took the fall for the actions of someone else. In the Twilight Zone, shady characters like Arch are often dealt some manner of ironic punishment. Arch was a selfish guy who recklessly assumed the identity of others. There's no Spider-Man in this world to save the day from guys like him. Arch's only nemesis here was a detective who was easily tricked by a revolving door. But the 5th dimension is all about cosmic justice. I don't have too many negatives as it relates to this episode. However, I did have 2 minor issues. The first being, it was never explained how Arch could seemingly mimic the voices of people he's never met. This wasn't a deal breaker, but it would have been interesting if this aspect of Arch's shapeshifting had somehow been addressed. My second minor criticism is the conclusion did heavily rely on Arch coincidentally running into the father of the boxer. I mean, talk about a small world. Lastly, there's some cool trivia related to this episode. For starters, at the time it was being pitched to Rod Serling, George Clayton Johnson's agent, Jay Richards, apparently felt Rubberface was a more catchy title. And I admit I find that title to be pretty interesting, although it does tend to conjure up some pretty comical images. Speaking of George Clayton Johnson, as most Twilight Zone fans know, he would go on to write many episodes of the classic series. But he also wrote the classic Star Trek episode, The Man Trap. Man Trap was about a shapeshifting alien with a taste for salt, who was capable of changing her appearance to resemble someone pleasing to others. On the Twilight Zone Vortex, it's mentioned that Johnson was still interested in exploring the premise of a shapeshifter who changes their appearance to resemble something pleasing to those who see it, which was the core idea of his original story. And that's basically how the Man Trap came to be. Despite some minor issues, I'd still say this was a fun, underrated episode with a great premise. I'd rate The Four of Us Are Dying 4 out of 5 face swaps. If you're into stories like this, I'd also recommend the Twilight Zone episode The Who of You from the 2019 series. Many of the same themes in this episode were explored more in that story. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you've seen this before, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. And if you enjoyed this review, remember, hit that sub button, hit that like button. Until next time, be well, take care, later.